An elderly blind woman went to a lawyer's office. She wanted a will drawn. She was a woman of meager means, and the lawyer said he could do the work for her for just $100. She was pleased with that. He sat her across the desk from him, began to interview her. She explained who her heirs were, what her property is, and what her distribution plan was. Lawyer made some careful notes, had it all down, and said, "I'll have it ready for you in about a week." She said, "That'll be just fine." She reached across the desk to shake hands with him. With that, he came around and helped her up. As they were walking towards the door, she started tapping the floor with her white stick, paused momentarily, and said, "I almost forgot." Reached into her purse gingerly, and she took out cash money. She turned to the lawyer, and she handed him the money for his fee. The lawyer said, "Thank you," and with that, he let go of her elbow because she was almost at the door. She reached the door, she opened it. She started across the threshold, and the lawyer looked into his hand to see the money that she had given him. Suddenly, he realized she hadn't paid him correctly. She hadn't paid him $100. He was holding two $100 bills, stuck tightly together. As the old woman was walking through the threshold of the door to leave, the lawyer's mind was racing. He was thinking, "My word, I'm faced with such a thorny ethical predicament here. Must I share the other 100 with my partner?" Well, I'll give you a moment to collect yourselves after that. That should about do it. Hello, I'm Steve Prophet. I'm going to talk to you today about ethics generally, and ethics with regards to auctioneers and auctioneering specifically. And we're going to take this interesting topic and break it down into 4 categories. Number 1, what is ethics? Number 2, why is ethics important? Number 3, how is ethics valuable to auctioneers? Number 4, how should we apply ethics to some common auctioneering issues? Let's get started. What is ethics? Ethics is like looks. Everybody has some. That doesn't mean they're the best or exactly what they need to have, but they have some. Our ethics define us. Define us as the people, the persons that we are. Nothing could be more important than that. We can rank ethics right up with family, with health, with religion. Speaking of ethics, it reminds me of a case decided back in 1964. I even went and looked it up, Jacob Ellis versus Ohio. Went to the United States Supreme Court. It was a pornography case. And you might say, well, what does pornography have to do with ethics? And I just found an interesting parallel because this is a very famous quote from Justice Potter Stewart, who in this pornography case wrote in his opinion, he said, "I know it when I see it." Well, I think that's a lot like ethics. We know ethics when we see it, even if we have some difficulty sometimes defining it. Let's look a little bit back at the history of ethics and talk about some of the core concepts involved. Because by doing so, we can boil this topic down and get a better understanding to how we can apply it for ourselves and others as we go forward in life and our businesses. Ethics is a topic that's challenged and perplexed scholars, philosophers from the beginning of time. It's a topic that everybody has a different view on, and everybody has a different slant as to exactly what it means in a given situation. But if we get some of these mechanics down, I think we can better handle it from our standpoint. Ethics comes from the Greek word ethos. Ethos meant character, habit, custom, disposition. The Greeks used it to talk about what was good and bad, what was moral and immoral, what was right and wrong, what it meant to be a good person. And that's really what ethics is all about. Some of the ancient ethical codes that we would be familiar with, and showing the historic reach back that ethics has, would be, well, I guess the first book of ethics, if you would, the 10 Commandments, found in the Old Testament. And then, of course, there's the Golden Rule, which Jesus spoke in the New Testament. The Hippocratic Oath, which all the physicians swear to uphold. Ethics is not limited to codes and writings, however. There's no rule book of ethics that we can turn to in every given situation to look up the answer of what is right, what is wrong, what is permissible, what is impermissible before we do or don't do something. Ethics is much larger than that, much larger than just written codes. The scope of ethics is the scope of life. Ethics is not limited to anything. It's the umbrella under which we live with everything that we become involved with in life. Because again, as I said earlier, ethics really defines who we are as a person, as a society, as a people. Past Secretary of the Treasury Henry Paulson one time said, "In just about every area of society, there's nothing more important than ethics." Indeed, just think about our daily lives. Ethics is involved when we go to the fast food restaurant and the young teenage cashier behind the counter, probably making minimum wage, mistakenly hands us $5 too much. What are we going to do about that? Ethics is involved when we go to the nice restaurant. We have a nice meal. The waiter brings our bill and we look and suddenly we recognize, gee, he didn't charge me for that delicious dessert that I just enjoyed. What are we going to do about that? Ethics is involved when we pull up in some haste, perhaps, trying to get home in the evening to the ATM at our local bank and put in our card because we need a little bit of cash. And lo and behold, out comes an extra 20. That never happens to me. But for the sake of this example, I'm giving it to you. What are we going to do about that? Ethics is involved when a friend comes to us and wants to gossip about another friend and the problems that friend is suffering. Here's a big point. Ethics is personal. It's just like fingerprints. It varies from one person to another. We all have different ethics that comprise the people that we are. We're going to see some examples of that as we go forward. Good ethics is unselfish. Good ethics is a concern for other people and things. The centerpiece of ethics is integrity. The integrity that we have as individuals. Morals, right versus wrong, good versus bad. Our feelings about things and our willingness to do things to benefit others and other things in the world in which we live. General Omar Bradley from back in the World War II era is one of the most historic American military figures of all time. General Bradley was a tremendous man by any historical account. He was the last of the five-star generals. He was the first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. During World War II, General Bradley commanded 43 American divisions comprising 1.3 million American soldiers, the largest military command that any commander in the history of the world has ever had. After the war, General Bradley became quite a statesman. General Bradley one time wrote, "Dependability, integrity, the characteristic of never doing anything wrong, that you would never cheat anyone, that you would give everybody a fair deal. Character is a sort of an all-inclusive thing. If a man has character, everyone has confidence in him." A lot of people have commented on integrity and character and ethics over the years. Satirist and journalist H.L. Mencken took a somewhat lighter view of it when he made this quip. "Conscience is the inner voice that warns us somebody may be looking." Well, certainly that's never been truer than today. Some people are more sensitive about ethics, others less so. That's another thing that we need to be watchful of and learn and understand as we're proceeding with this. This is not a rigid set of rules. This is not a rigid lifestyle. Again, ethics, it's what we are individually, and so it's going to vary from person to person. So yes, you have sensitivity amongst people that can be higher and lower to ethical situations. But in between, we have, perhaps we'll say, the benefit of a community judgment, a collective community judgment that comes together as to kind of this is what we consider generally to be right, and this is what we generally consider to be wrong. And an example of that would be this. Most people, you would hope everyone, but most people would agree that it would be wrong to do something intentionally harmful to another. That's a rule that we can all understand and live by, that we should not do things to harm others. A contemporary view of ethics perhaps harkens back to Socrates. Socrates was a great Greek philosopher from the 5th century BC, 500 years before the birth of Christ. And Socrates framed ethics with this question, which is how we think of ethics today, contemporaneously. And that question was, what ought one to do? Now, Socrates was not asking what we should do about a particular instance, a particular thing, a particular event. Socrates was talking in a much broader context. Socrates was saying, what kind of person do I want to be? What kind of life do I want to live? Character and integrity are the essence of ethics. A lot of our modern view about ethics came from the ancient Greeks. I mentioned earlier Socrates. Aristotle was another tremendously influential Greek philosopher who lived back in the 4th century BC. Again, 400 years before the birth of Christ, a lot of these ideas were being carried forward that would fit into our current society in thinking about ethics, ethical situations, ethical considerations, ethical conduct. Aristotle had some tremendously influential views back in his era, and some that have come forward to today that I was raised with. Aristotle believed that good character could be developed out of self-discipline. He also believed and taught that overindulgence and going to extremes could corrupt what otherwise would be good character. Aristotle taught that moderation was the key to a success in life. From the time I was a young boy, my great-aunt Nan was a very influential figure in my life, and I talked to her about all kinds of things. She was a widow woman, but a very kindly person. I remember Aunt Nan told me one time, I'd gone to college at that point, and she told me one day we were talking about life and such, and she said, "Son, the key to a successful life is moderation in all things." Well, I'm sure my great-aunt Nan from New Kent County, Virginia, would not know Aristotle and his teachings from the 4th century BC. She was a country woman, a farm woman. But she certainly had those teachings passed down to her, which shows the influence again of the ancient Greeks and how their principles have held and passed the test of time, if you would. And by the way, my great-aunt Nan lived on her own until just past the age of 100. So I think moderation in all things certainly worked for her, and I'm going to adopt that for my own purposes in life. Aristotle also taught that weakness of will could defeat us even if we knew the difference between right and wrong. In other words, we could fall on the side of wrong despite knowing what was right, just because we were weak in our will. We lacked the discipline to do the right thing. That's another important point for us to be mindful of with regards to ethics and thinking about ethical matters. Aristotle said, weakness of will. Well, don't we say that all the time? We make a mistake, and how many times have you said or heard someone else say, I really knew better. I shouldn't have done that. I knew better. That's what Aristotle was teaching us. The norms we embrace to distinguish what is acceptable and unacceptable in our lives are what philosophers call virtues. And virtues that we all are acquainted with would be such as these: benevolence, courage, discipline, empathy, fairness, fidelity, generosity, honesty, respect for others, responsibility. When we regularly repeat a virtue, it eventually becomes part of our character. Our character, though, is also shaped by influences that we experience in life. And common influences that all of us encounter are such things as our family, our community, our individual personal conscience about matters, community customs, the educational experience that we have, our life experiences, the influences that come to us through the media in all its many forms, our peers, our role models, and our religion. Speaking of character, I think back my law school days up at the University of Virginia, I remember being in evidence class. And a professor came in one day and we were talking about the differences in reputation evidence that might be introduced to trial. That's particularly used in criminal cases. And character evidence, which also is used. But they're two different slants, if you would. And a professor tried to explain that to us. He made this distinction. He said, reputation is who people think you are. Character is who you really are. I was in law practice not too many years. I'm going to say probably 5, 6 years one time. I was representing some women. It was a mother and 2 grown daughters. They'd been involved in a serious wreck out on an interstate highway involving a large commercial truck, a tandem-wheel dump truck. And that truck was loaded with fill dirt, so it was quite a heavy vehicle coming down the road. And the way the wreck happened was that the dump truck was in the passing lane. The ladies in their automobile were in the right travel lane on this 4-lane divided interstate highway. The dump truck went to change lanes from left to right, and he did it too close to these ladies. And what happened was the rear of that truck literally caught onto the automobile and began dragging it down the highway with great force and great commotion and great noise coming from within that automobile as those women were screaming to the top of their lungs for salvation at that point, for goodness sakes, because they thought they were all going to be killed. The truck dragged the vehicle for almost a mile before he went around a curve. The vehicle broke loose, veered off the highway, slammed into a guardrail, and these ladies, unfortunately, were significantly injured, 2 in particular. I represented all 3. And the husband of one of these girls that I represented came to my office one day. They were younger people, working class people. She had certainly been nice enough in every regard with my dealings with her. And he wanted to see me. I had not met him before, and he came to my office, and I recall him sitting down and we just chatting neighborly and little just small talk. And then he said this to me. He said, Mr. Prophet, I want to know what my wife can do to really make this a good case. And I said, well, I don't understand what you mean. I mean, it's a significant case already, and we think we're going to be able to prove liability, and she certainly suffered some significant injuries, and so the case is coming together nicely. He said, but I mean a really good case. And I said, well, I guess I'm just not following you. And then he said this to me, and I'll never forget his exact words, and they were these: insurance fraud is nothing to me. What does she need to do? I said, well, let me tell you something, friend. Insurance fraud is a whole lot to me, starting with a felony, with illegal, unethical, wrong, bad, any descriptor like that you want to apply to it. I'm not going to have any part of it, and I'm really ashamed that you would come into my office and even bring something like this up. Well, he got real quiet. And I said, we're just going to leave that like you never even said it before. Your wife's case is coming along fine. I think everything's going to work out to her favor, but the case is going to be what it is. It's not going to be more, and I'm certainly not going to try to make it less. Let's just pretend this conversation never happened. If it does again, I won't be involved in this case. He left, and a few days later, I remember the lady called me and she apologized and explained that he had gotten excited and said some things he shouldn't have said, and all was forgotten. But I never forgot that, because you see, we're talking about different people's ethics and their different views on ethics. Mine were extremely rigid about that matter. His were extremely flexible and coming from a completely opposite direction than my own. It's important to understand things like that. It's also important to understand that ethics is really a broader context than is the law. And by that, let me say that in the law, there might be some things that are legal that would not be ethical. Let's think about that. Legal but not ethical. Well, what could it be? Well, here's an example. Suppose I was standing on the street corner one day, waiting for the red light to turn so I could cross in the pedestrian crosswalk. And here came a blind person. And the blind person was oblivious to the fact that the light was red and that there was oncoming traffic. And I simply stood there and let that person walk right out into the oncoming traffic, and whatever was going to happen would happen. Nothing illegal about my conduct, but it certainly wouldn't be ethical. So we can have events that are legal but not ethical. Justice Stewart wrote about that one time. He said, ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. The converse of that is also true. What might be illegal might be ethical. Well, how could something be illegal and yet be ethical? Well, here's an example of that. Suppose grocers in your area all got together one day at a meeting and they said, you know, this is bad. We've got poor people. We've got struggling families all starving and scraping and working so hard to survive. We really need to help them. Could we all agree that we would lower the prices on our staples to help all these impoverished and struggling people? And let's just suppose that all the grocers, and take any number you want, there are a dozen, there are 2 dozen, there are whatever number, they all said, yes, that's a very noble and wonderful thing to do. We should all lower our prices to the same level and keep them there to help poor people. And they do that. Well, that would certainly be a fine ethical thing to do, very noble, very virtuous. But it's illegal. It's federal price fixing and violative of the law. So we can have situations, again, that are illegal yet ethical. Ethics is a much broader body of information and thought and valuation than is just the law. If you ever hear somebody say something like, everybody does that, well, that's just the way we do it around here. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Let's think about that. That's really the antithesis of ethics, because ethics is about virtue and character and integrity and having within you what it takes to make judgments, no matter what the facts, the circumstances, to do the right thing at the right time. And those examples I just gave you, they're just the opposite of that. They have nothing to do with good ethical thought or value or character or integrity. A big point to grasp, I think, is this. Ethics, as seen by others, is not going to be what's within you. I like to describe ethics like this. It's an internal compass. It's an internal compass that guides me in my thinking and my actions. That's my internal ethical compass. But it's also subject to an objective reading. And by that I mean what I feel and value and think is my character and integrity within. People aren't going to judge me on that. They're going to judge me on what they see, what they perceive. They can't see what's within me. They see my conduct. And that's how we're all judged by others. Not by what we feel, by what we think, by what our values internally are. We're judged by our conduct. I once read this, wrote it down, I thought so much of it. Your beliefs don't make you a better person, your behavior does. That's what we're speaking about. Let's go to our second topic. Why is ethics important? Well, let's consider everyday matters, just the common little things that we run into all the time, like, again, the example I used earlier, the young cashier at the fast food restaurant giving us $5 too much. Who's entitled to be wearing line at the grocery store, whatever, just little small items like this, the everyday stuff. We rely upon ethics for those answers. Certainly we do. Ethics is a built-in value system. Again, all of us have it, but we've got different values and different looks and takes on the values that we do have. But our ethics have prepared us, given us a predisposition about how we're going to react to different things. And that's an important distinction to understand. Ethics prepares us, programs us to react. We don't have to think through all these things. When somebody wants to step in front of us at the grocery line and we thought we were there first, this person wants to get in line ahead of us and they've got a big cart of groceries and gee, we really don't like that. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer. We're pretty well conditioned to how we're going to react to a situation like that, whether it's rude and get behind me or it's gracious and, of course, please come right in here. We're predisposed about how we're going to do that because our ethics has prepared us for that. It's as if we're programmed for it in our everyday lives. Now, we get to more complex situations, And that's where a lot of thinking does come into it. And if it's a professional setting, a business setting, perhaps there are codes we're going to consult, or writings, or other people's thoughts. As complexity goes up, thinking goes up likewise. But the ethical values that we have and that we carry forward, they are anchor points. They are foundation stones for how we're going to see things and think about them. And having those values helps wipe away a lot of what would otherwise be moral ambiguity in people, just total uncertainty what to do. We have a good sense of how we're going to react to a situation from the very beginning. We might think it through and analyze it and try to clear up some of the fog that we're experiencing, but we have a pretty doggone good idea how we're going to react because, again, ethical precepts are foundation stones for everything that we're doing in life. And by the way, let's make this point. Ethics is not a matter of black and white, this way or that way. There's a huge spectrum of all sorts of grayish hues in between the extremes of black on one side, white on the other side. And that's the spectrum of ethics. And within these multiple possibilities, sometimes it's not even possible that we get the quote-unquote right answer. Sometimes we've just got to get the best answer we can come up with for the prevailing facts and circumstances of the situation. And that leads to an interesting point too. Ethics can be a painful disposition. It can be a challenging, difficult disposition because we have to make decisions. And when we have to make a decision, we have to take responsibility for it. And when we have to take responsibility for the decision and it causes discomfort to someone else, inconvenience, difficulty, whatever, that's unpleasant for any of us. But such is the case of utilizing ethics in everyday living. Why is ethics important? I think it's important on several different levels, all of which find their way into our lives. It's important on a personal level, first off, because ethics is what, again, defines who we are, and who we are gives us a sense of self-worth. And if we're ethical people, we have a sense of responsibility, of discipline, of integrity, of being a good person, and all that's extremely satisfying. It brings us stability and it brings us inner peace in our lives. Unethical people, to the contrary, are often troubled people. Nobody can treat people badly and not have some thoughts or feelings about that. Nobody can trample all over the rights of others and not have some recognition of what's going on. And those people don't have the advantage of living with the comfort and security and satisfaction that high ethical people do. On an educational level, ethics sets the standard by which students are expected to comport in the educational experience. The fairness, the honesty, the good effort that's to be made to advance your education. When I was at Virginia once again, up at the university, we have an honor code at the University of Virginia. It's 7 words. 7 words comprise the honor code at the University of Virginia and define all that we are and are not to do to be in good standing within the university community. And at the University of Virginia, to not be in good standing is to not be in the community. It's a single sanction if you are found guilty of an honor violation, and that's expulsion, and it's permanent expulsion. 7 words. No student shall lie, cheat, or steal. We lived our academic lives by that rule right there. And a founding father of the university and one of the founding fathers for the nation and the 3rd president of the United States, and a list of other great notable accomplishments that would be far too long for the time that I have available to me today, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, our honor code, came from Mr. Jefferson's teachings, and one of the things that he wrote early on was nobody can acquire honor by doing what is wrong. I was a 3rd-year student at the university in law school, and we had entered our 2nd semester, which just put us a couple of months away from graduation, and I had a moot court problem. And this moot court problem, as all of them we had back in those days did, required us to pair up with another student. So another student and I were in a team, and we were going to face off against some other students in teams, and You were given a legal issue and you had to do the research and write a brief on it. And then you had to come into the moot court setting, it's called, and do what's called an appellate argument. This would be like an appeal of this legal issue. And the two member teams, each would have a side of the case, and we'd get up and we'd argue our side, and the other team would get up and argue their side. Well, anyhow, with the writing of the brief, I had half the brief to write, and the other student, my partner, had the other half to write. And as we had completed the brief and put it together and submitted it to our professor, and we're now nearing the argument stage of the problem, I'm reading the brief one night to refresh myself on some points and go back over my research notes and such so I can be prepared to put on the best argument that I might when we went into the moot court setting within just a couple of days. And all of a sudden I very unpleasantly read some unique text that my fellow student has written in there. And I think I've seen this somewhere. And I start looking back through my research materials and had quite a few copies of cases that had been decided that I'd been working with. And lo and behold, I find a case decided by an appellate court, a real court, in another jurisdiction, and a judge has written this glowing text, which is the exact text that my fellow student had in his brief, without quotation marks, without attribution, with no citation whatsoever. He just had presented this as his singular, own unique work. And it was a lie. It was thievery. It was plagiarism. At the university, it was very clear. I went to the student and I said, here's what you've written. Here is a case. If I look at this and I look at your brief, they're the exact text. There are no quotes, there's no attribution, there's no citation. He didn't say anything. I said, do you realize that you're 2 months from graduation and you can be expelled from law school for this? Still didn't say anything. I said, well, look, I'm sorry, but here's the bottom line. I have a duty as a member of the university's community under the honor code with which we all live and operate to report this. But I don't want to do that. I want you to do the right thing. I want you to report it. And I want you and me to go to our professor so you can do that. And then we'll just have to see what we see. He was very reluctant to do so, but I made it very clear we were going to do one or the other. He joined me and we did go to the professor. He was a visiting professor from another school, which is probably what saved him, by the way, because he presented all of this, and of course he did it in the kindest light that he might. But the professor said, I understand that you've got text that's not attributed. You have not quoted it, you've not cited it. And he meekly said, yes. The professor got a very stern and disgusted look about him, and he said, how far are you from graduation? And he said, 2 months. And he said, I want this back in my office in 3 days with all the correct citations and quotations. He did. The issue ended, and that was that. But that was the most important ethics issue that I faced in law school. And it's clear to me, I didn't have to go to a code. I didn't have to sit there and think about it at night, research it. I was predisposed to know how to react in a situation like that, and was proud of myself, quite frankly, that I did react in the right way and that it was handled in the correct manner. I've often wondered whether that student learned anything from it and went on to have a better life, or whether he's continued to cheat through law practice. I don't know. But that was an unpleasant experience. Another reason that ethics is important is on a business level. The bottom line is this: caveat emptor is an extremely important concept. We've got to always beware. That's what the Latin phrase caveat emptor teaches us, to always be alert, to beware. But we've got to have a reasonable degree of trust in one another, of the fairness and value that we expect to receive, we're going to receive in business dealings, in order to have a business economic model that works. Otherwise, we would bog down with everybody being so suspicious of everyone else. We'd get nothing bought, nothing sold. Economic production would just bog down. Imagine the situation if we had, go back to grocers, I used them as an example a little while ago, but price fixing. I'm not trying to pick on grocers, but just suppose that we had grocers that purposely concealed and sold spoiled produce. And we were all subject to buying it, and they wouldn't take any of it back. It was just, if you buy it from us, you're stuck with it, you're out of your money. Well, if that's the basis upon which we bought produce from grocers, how much produce would we buy? And a little bit that we did buy, we'd spend so much time inspecting that nothing would, again, be bought and sold. So ethics is extremely important on the business level. On a societal level, ethics is important to us having a stable and productive society. Well, back in auctioneering school, I had a wonderful instructor by the name of Bing Carter from out in Kansas. And Mr. Carter was a tremendous auctioneer and a real professional, and he used to hammer ethical and professional principles to us all the time. And I recall a story he told one time about a fellow auctioneer, and he summed it up like this. He said, as a well-known auctioneer in my community, and one viewed and judged typically to be a professional and a good person, Mr. Carter said, I would much rather be seen walking out of church on Sunday morning with my wife than being dragged out of a bar on a Saturday night by the police drunk. Ethics is important to us on a societal level also because it's something that we pass on to others. Just as we've gotten it from others, we pass it on to others. We benefit others, and in doing so benefit ourselves and benefit society as a whole. But here's a caution. No matter how good we are, no matter how good we think we are, no matter how good we've been in the past, we are all subject to that terrible word of temptation. Life is full of temptation. The Bible teaches it. The courts teach it. The media teach it. We see it everywhere. The vice of temptation and people, good people, falling victim to it, doing things like exercising bad judgment that are unethical. We all need to be aware of that. And there are three elements for you to think about with regard to temptation and ethical failure. Three elements that come together that can end up taking you or someone else to the wrong place. And those three elements are need, opportunity, and rationalization. I have seen those commented on before and called the triangle of fraud. One of the really interesting lessons that I learned about ethics, people's judgment, decisions, what they do, how they rationalize things, came as a result of a parking spot outside of a courthouse one afternoon. I had driven down to file some motions in a case that I was handling, and there was a parking spot right in front of the courthouse, for goodness sakes. I mean, that was a rarity right there to find that. Afternoon traffic being what it was downtown, everything so congested. And I thought, boy, today is my lucky day. Well, I pulled up into the proper manner to parallel park. We all know you pull ahead of the parking place, you're going to back up into it. And so as I'm sitting there starting to go into reverse to start backing up, all of a sudden this little subcompact car just whips directly into the parking place. And I'm left like coming back. And I've got to stop. And this woman jumps out, sticks some money hastily in the meter, and she starts down the sidewalk. I rolled the window down. And this was years ago before you worried about somebody shooting at you or something. And I hollered out to her. I said, ma'am, I'm trying to park here. She said, I'm in a hurry. And off she went. That evening I was at my mom and daddy's house. And I don't know what it was. Something just came up. And I told Daddy, I said, I had the most disgusting experience this afternoon. And I told him. I wasn't angry about it, but it was disgusting. And I told it to Daddy, and Daddy said this to me. He said, son, that's a good lesson for you to never forget. No matter how stupid, no matter how wrong, illogical, someone does something, they can rationalize it, and it all makes sense to them. So that all made sense to her. Whatever you see somebody else do, it can look awful to you, but it makes sense in their head. I never forgot that about that parking place and the lesson Daddy gave me, and I found it to be true time and time and time again, and you will find it in ethical issues to be exactly that. Going back to what we talked about a moment ago, our triangle of fraud, need, opportunity, and our third element, rationalization. A lot of people can rationalize a lot of things that make no sense to anyone else. We talked earlier about, we're going to see some examples, some contrast about different people utilizing their ethical values in completely different ways. And I think there's no better big business example of that than something that we've seen in recent years in this country. One case older than the next, but nevertheless, I think they compare and contrast very interestingly. Let's think back on the Johnson & Johnson case. Johnson & Johnson makes Tylenol. I think we're all aware of that. Johnson & Johnson has been in business since 1886, a major Fortune 500 corporation. But back in 1982 in Chicago, 7 people bought Tylenol off the shelf, took the capsules, and promptly died. It was laced with cyanide. It had been tampered with. Someone had purposely poisoned these capsules, and 7 poor unfortunate souls died as a result of it. Johnson & Johnson was faced with a tremendous public relations and financial disaster. Its management stepped up immediately and acted. Overnight, Johnson & Johnson recalled 31 million bottles of Tylenol. All the retail stock that there was in this country was recalled at a $100 million value of product taken out of the marketplace. Their market share dropped from about a third down to 8% with this nationwide recall. A year later, with all that Johnson & Johnson did about safer packaging and reassuring the public and continuing to show that the company and its products could be trusted, a year later, Johnson & Johnson's good name had been restored. Tylenol was once again the most purchased analgesic in the marketplace. Johnson & Johnson had the highest market share, and they've been lauded ever since as a tremendous example of corporate responsibility and good deeds in the face of a terrible situation. Contrast that with Enron Corporation. Enron was formed in 1985 by merging 2 energy companies. By 2000, the company was reporting $100 million in annual sales. $100 billion in annual sales. $100 billion was twice what they had reported the previous year. Analysts were a little bit suspicious about it, but everybody was so pleased with Enron, it just kept booming, booming, booming. Well, it boomed right along until it went bust at the end of 2001 when the company filed for bankruptcy amidst a tremendous financial and accounting scandal that took place. It was the second largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. 4,500 jobs lost, employees' life savings wiped out, stockholder losses of $60 billion in market value, and Arthur Andersen, the company's outside auditors, out of business itself. Warren Buffett, the financial guru, later commented about Enron and said, "Only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked." Well, obviously some of them had been. Confidence and trust can be earned over time, but lost in an instant. That's the lesson of Enron Corporation. And there's one more lesson too. Lest you doubt it, anybody can look it up. Enron Corporation had a wonderful code of ethics, just as Johnson & Johnson does. The difference is Johnson & Johnson's is one that they mean, that they take to heart, that they live, that they conduct their business daily by. Enron's was nothing but the cheapest kind of window dressing. Businessman and philanthropist W. Clement Stone years ago wrote this: "Have the courage to say no. Have the courage to face the truth. Do the right thing because it is right. These are the magic keys to living your life with integrity." And so they are. That brings us to our third topic. How is ethics valuable to auctioneers? Well, it's certainly valuable first and foremost to us because it's what defines us. What defines us and how we're seen and judged by our clients, our customers, our peers, our competitors, the public at large. Ethics is what they see in making the determinations about us in these regards. It's also important to us because ethical people are honest and caring and loyal and trustworthy people. And that works right into our business because our business is a people business. That's what auctioneering is all about. We sell people's property to other people. We deal with people on a daily basis in every facet of what we do. So to have people skills is the height of what an auctioneer needs, and ethics plays right into that perfectly because people gravitate towards good people. They gravitate towards trustworthy people, reliable people, decent people. Few people gravitate towards unethical people who are all the opposites. And for goodness sakes, who wants to be associated with any of that? And the bottom line is scant few, and certainly the public at large does not. We auctioneers, we're always talking about professionalism. We want to be professionals. Well, we want to be professionals because we think it elevates us in our standing in our communities, in our industry, our work, the esteem with which others hold us, and value for our business. It has real financial value to be seen, given the accord of being a professional person. Well, when has anybody ever said, I want to go see that perfectly unethical professional so-and-so? Nobody says that. Professionals are always deemed to be ethical people until they prove otherwise. So as auctioneers seeking to be professionals, it's incumbent upon us to take on the barrier, the burden of being ethical people, to pick up that load and carry it forward to fulfill the responsibility so that we can be seen as professionals, ethical professionals. The industry values ethics and ethical conduct. The National Auctioneers Association, to which many of us are members and all of us are familiar with, has a very good code of ethics. 3 articles that I excerpted from that to speak with you about today. Article 1, members pledge to lawfully and ethically protect and promote the interest of the seller. Well, there's our word right there, ethically protect and promote the interest. Article 2, members owe the buyer the duties of, well, here are our virtues we've spoken about already in this program: honesty, integrity, and fair dealing at all times. Article 9, members shall not misrepresent or conceal material facts. Again, all going to good dealing, fair play, honesty, integrity, ethics. Unethical people don't have the traits to be successful auctioneers because they're unable to attract people, to hold people, to build off of a customer base to a larger customer base. They don't have that ability because, again, people are not drawn to unethical conduct. Ethical lapses, they trigger criticism, bad publicity, damage to reputation, lost sales, reduced profitability, regulatory complaints, sometimes lawsuits. None of the things that auctioneers are interested in having, for goodness sakes. We're interested in having successful businesses, successful auctions, satisfied customers, clients, making money to support ourselves and our families, be good citizens within our communities, and ethics plays into all of that. We all know auctioneers that we recognize as being good ethical practitioners. We admire them. We speak favorably of them. We also, unfortunately, probably know some that are not ethical people. And how do we speak of them? Well, it's not favorably. It's never favorably, because there's nothing favorable to say about somebody who conducts themselves in an unethical manner. And so we simply ask ourselves, what value does it have to auctioneers? The value of being above that, of being on the top half, the good half, the better half of the practice, to be looked up to, not down upon. Five-star General Dwight D. Eisenhower was the supreme Allied commander back during World War II. General Eisenhower later went on to become the 34th President of the United States. He was a military heroic figure, well known throughout American history. And General Eisenhower had a lot to say about a lot of different things. He wrote this after he'd come home from World War II. The supreme quality for leadership is unquestionably integrity. Without it, no real success is possible, no matter whether it is on a section gang, a football field, in an army, or in an office. That's what General Eisenhower had to say, and it's as true about auctioneering as all of the things that he spoke to directly. Speaking of what value ethics has for auctioneers, several points come quickly to mind. Word of mouth. How many times have we heard that word of mouth advertising is the most powerful, the most persuasive, the most effective advertising that there is? I think that's well understood. I don't believe anybody would quarrel with that. Well, think how important ethics plays into word of mouth advertising then. That's what word of mouth advertising is all about. What does somebody start off saying? He's a great guy. She's a great lady. They do a terrific job. They're honest. They work hard. They're trustworthy. They're dependable. They're reliable. That's what they're talking about. If we want the benefit of word-of-mouth advertising, we've got to give people the right fodder to put out about us, and that is ethical conduct, good values, good conduct that we practice as we go along in our auctioneering work, in the auctions we conduct. Confidence. Speaking of auctions, we are selling confidence. We say we're selling goods at auction. Well, that's the back end of the equation. The front of the equation is to sell confidence. Think about that for a second. The first thing that we sell, not sometimes, every time, is confidence. We have to sell a seller, a prospective seller, on confidence that that seller can bring his or her property to us, and we'll do a good job in taking it to auction, offering it up, and selling it. We have to sell bidders on confidence that they can come to the auction and have confidence in the process and in us and bid and buy fairly and legitimately. We're selling confidence to the public that we are good, legitimate businessmen and businesswomen who are able and qualified to conduct our businesses as we do and don't need to be over-regulated or to be legislated out of existence. We're selling confidence to everyone around us, and good ethics is what backs up and supports all of that confidence that we're selling. How many times have you heard the old auctioneer's expression, your next auction is sitting right in front of you? How many times have we heard it? We heard it, we've said it so many times because it's true. We conduct an auction and a prospective seller is sitting right up front watching us and listening to others to learn what they can about us, to make a determination whether they're going to use us as their auctioneer. Well, what seller or prospective seller is going to use an auctioneer that is conducting him or herself poorly, or that it's spoken of poorly by those in attendance? And the answer to that is about nobody. Ethics is so important to us in attracting and holding business and growing our businesses. A big point that I will offer up to you is the era in which we live, the internet era, the connected era. Everyone walks around now on their hip. We've got a little device. It's got more functions than I can even name, but the common ones that I use and so many other people use just routinely, regularly, daily, it's a telephone, it's a camera, it's a recorder, it's a video camera, it's an internet connection. It's got everything. If we don't operate ethically these days, anyone can photograph it, video it, download it to the internet. Within moments of the act being committed, we see this in the news all the time. These events can be transmitted around the world, for goodness sakes. They go online where they live forever. You can't get rid of bad news once it gets onto the internet. Ethical conduct is so important to keep us on the right side of all these eyes that are watching us and all these devices that are able to oversee us and record the history of what we are doing. We cannot afford to make a mistake. Today, more than ever before, the sensitivity for good, honest conduct of business is so important. Again, no one can bear a mistake, and we see in the news all the time the news of the mistakes that are made along with the videos taken. We've seen people lose their jobs. We've seen people prosecuted. All of these problems. We've got to be so much aware of that. Ethics is our best insurance. Ethics will always keep us on the right side of that type of situation. When Warren Buffett, the financial guru, was called upon to be the chairman of Salomon Brothers some years ago, they were in quite an ethical dilemma themselves. Salomon Brothers was the investment banking house. And Buffett gathered all the management people together and he addressed them. And he said this to them. He said, I want employees to ask themselves whether they are willing to have any contemplated act appear on the front page of their local paper the next day to be read by their spouses, children, and friends, with the reporting done by an informed and critical reporter. That was the test he gave them. I like to refer to that quite often as the Buffett test. Think about how your conduct would comport with the Buffett test. Will Rogers said it a little more succinctly some years before Warren Buffett came along. Will Rogers one time said, lead your life so you wouldn't be ashamed to sell the family parrot to the town gossip. Ethical behavior will reward auctioneers in other notable ways as well. And I'll give you several to think about. First, you can gain the recognition of important associations from which you might draw clients, customers, either one. That would be sellers or it would be bidders and buyers. Associations, influential groups, they like to be associated with ethical people, professional people. They don't want any part of unethical people or unprofessional people. Commercial clients would be another. Auctioneers, we're always looking for, or should be looking for, good commercial clients. Lawyers, bankers, corporations, good substantial firms have a lot of value that they can bring to the auction markets, value that we could help them sell. Well, they want to use professionals that are ethical people. Nobody's going to say, let's go out and find an unethical bum that we can hire to do our important auction business. These commercial clients are important clients, well-heeled clients, and they want people accordingly to handle their business. Access to influential people, an ethical auctioneer, an upstanding auctioneer, professional auctioneer, is going to have access to community leaders, civic leaders, again, important business people, politicians, and the media. The media can be a tremendous source of benefit for us in our businesses and public relations that they can report about our auctions. No reporter is going to be interested in associating with an unprofessional, unethical person, just the opposite. We want to always be the opposite so we can seek out and have these contacts with these important, influential people, and again, like the media. I taught auction school at Reppert Auction School for a number of years. At the same time I was teaching at Mendenhall. I always enjoyed going up there. And I can remember that when I would teach the ethics portion of the legal class there was a great print that Dennis Cruz had hanging in the back of the classroom at Reppert. And it had a quotation from M.H. McKee, and I always cited it to the students. And I want to read it to you now. It's a tremendous quote. It says, "Integrity is one of several paths." And by the way, this print with this quotation on it was a deep forest scene. So there was a literal path running through all this heavy underbrush, this very heavy trodden path. And then the quote followed. It said, "Integrity is one of several paths. It distinguishes itself from the others because it is the right path and the only one upon which you will never get lost." This brings us to our fourth topic, how we should apply ethics to some common auctioneering issues. To the previous core virtues that we spoke about back in segment 1, I want to bring along for this segment several fiduciary duties and also a Uniform Commercial Code statute that will bolster our ethical requirements. With regards to fiduciary duties, here are 4. A principal is owed an agent's a duty of acting in furtherance of the principal's interest, a duty of loyalty, a duty of obedience to the principal, and a duty of truthful disclosure of all relevant known facts. And along with obedience to the principal, I'll add this, obedience to law as well. Now, we as auctioneers are merchants in the eyes of the Commercial Code in all of our commercial dealings, and we owe a duty of good faith in all that we do. Section 2-103B of the Uniform Commercial Code gives our definition for good faith. In the case of a merchant, it means honesty in fact and the observance of reasonable commercial standards of fair dealing in the trade. Now let's briefly talk about 6 issues that commonly come up in auctioneering. First is the suitability of the seller, the property, and the circumstances for an auction. We're auctioneers. We always want to do an auction. We want to sell property. We want to earn selling commissions. That's our business. Sellers, they just want to sell for the most money that they can possibly get. It doesn't matter what the mechanism for doing that is, whether it's an auction or it's a retail sale or it's a tags, they don't care. They just want the most money that can be had. But we as auctioneers want to do auctions, and it's incumbent upon us to remember our ethical precepts, our agency duties, and properly advise our sellers and prospective sellers on whether or not an auction is going to fit their needs for a particular situation. We have to give them and owe them up front that type of information to further their interest, to truthfully disclose all that we know, to give professional advice, pros and cons, so they can make a proper informed decision on what to do. Second topic would be the auction method itself and presenting that to the seller. This is another issue auctioneers commonly face with prospects for auction. Again, the seller just wants to sell for the most money, but the auctioneer wants to sell and make selling commissions. And we know that to do that, that often means an absolute auction is our best option. Well, there are two methods of auction primarily, an auction with reserve and auction without reserve, i.e. the absolute auction. But the auction with reserve is sometimes a better choice for a given seller, given property, given circumstances. Once again, we have to be truthful to our ethical requirements and to our fiduciary duties and give the information to further the principal's interest, to truthfully disclose the facts, to outline the pros and the cons so that the prospective seller has an informed basis for a decision in which method to choose. And never, but never, but never tell a prospective seller or a seller that an absolute auction always brings the most money, because it doesn't. And we know that. If that were the case, everyone would do nothing but an absolute auction. It doesn't do that, and we should never say so, because to say something we know to be untrue is to act unethically, and we never want to do that. The third topic is, again, something that comes up very frequently. The seller wants to bid for the property. Why do sellers do this? They want to protect their property against an unwanted sacrifice. And they think by having the right to exercise the option to bid at any point in time, they can ensure that they're not going to lose their property for less money than they want to accept for it. Typically, they can lawfully do that without problem, as long as they fully disclose it. But sellers often don't want to disclose it. They want to do it hidden. And that's something the law will not allow and not tolerate. So again, we need to give up front the information to fully inform the prospect, the seller, of what the law will and will not allow, outline the pros and cons of either disclosing the seller's option to bid and allowing the seller to then do that, or just not have the seller bid, one or the other. But we need to remember this, that our obligation, ethically and legally, to obey the law trumps all interest. So no matter what the seller wants, even though the seller's our principal, we have to abide first and foremost by the law and owe that obedience. And in doing so, we protect the integrity of the auction and also the auctioneer's integrity and reputation. A fourth topic would be misrepresentation of the lots. We run into sellers who are more interested in money than anything. They're willing to fudge a little bit in order to get more money, even if that means misrepresenting what the lots are. Fakes, reproductions, all sorts of issues that can come to bear. We don't want to be involved in tricking or deceiving anyone, and we can't allow anyone to come to auction and pollute the auction markets with the fraud that is involved in the deceit that's involved in misrepresenting what the lots are, even if sellers encourage us to do so in order to maximize their sales revenue. We can't do it. So we've got to give, again, truthful disclosure of all the information to the prospective seller, the seller, including the fact that misrepresentation is fraud, both civil and criminal, and that we are obedient to the law, and that trumps all other interest in order to uphold the integrity of the auction and our own integrity. A fifth topic would be in the conduct of the auction, the use of phantom and shill bidding. Again, this is a mechanism that there are sellers who would willingly and readily sign on to this because they just are interested in the money, and that's about all they're interested in. But we as ethical professional auctioneers have to be interested in much more than that. Our own integrity, the integrity of the auction markets, and protecting the bidders who would become buyers in our auctions. We have duties to them to conduct lawful and legitimate auctions, and at all times we must uphold that. And by the way, any illegal conduct by bidders, such as in pooling, collusion, to suppress prices in an auction, that's unlawful itself, and there are mechanisms for addressing that. But a mechanism that is not available for us to address that is to ourselves resort to illegal activity, such as phantom bidding and shilling. You don't have two wrongs to make a right, and auctioneers owe legitimate markets in all regards. A sixth topic that I want to just briefly speak to are what I call derogatory acts towards competitors. Unfortunately, this is an issue that we've had in auctioneering for some time. There's a segment of auctioneers that get involved with speaking ill of one another, gossiping about one another. As an attorney who's represented a lot of auctioneers over the years in various matters, I've even had regulatory complaints I've had to defend for auctioneer clients that were brought at the behest of competing auctioneers who encouraged third parties to go to these regulatory boards and file complaints against auctioneers that I ended up representing. That's a terrible practice. Nobody benefits when activities of this sort are conducted, and we're all hurt. Industry is hurt as a result of it. Just remember this: gossip is not a virtue. Neither is pettiness. Neither is meanness. When I was a newspaper boy many years ago, I remember that sometimes I'd read Ann Lander's advice column. She was a lady that wrote a little advice column daily in the newspaper. But I remember particularly one thing. I was probably 14, 15 years old when I read this, but it stuck with me for all these years. Ann Landers one time advised someone in regards to gossip. She said, big people talk about ideas. Little people talk about other people. Courage is a virtue, cowardice is not. Enlisting someone else to go and make a regulatory complaint against a competitor is not just wrong, it's cowardly. There's no courage and nobility in doing that. If an auctioneer is aware of conduct that's being committed by a competitor that it warrants a regulatory complaint, the auctioneer should stand up on his or her own 2 feet, go forward and make the complaint, and put his or her name with it. I'll close this particular point with my mama's advice to me many years ago, which I'm sure is the same advice your mama's given you many times. If you can't say something good about someone, don't say anything at all. Well, this brings me to a close. And in closing, let me share these comments with you. I've heard people before say that misrepresentation, undisclosed seller bidding, phantom and shill bidding, other forms of fraud and trickery, that's the auction game. I don't believe that, and I've always been disgusted to hear it. That's a game that no one should be associated with. That's a name that no one should carry. Integrity and trust are essential to any successful business, and this includes auctioneering. Real integrity, real trust come from having ethics and practicing them daily in all that we do. And what I would encourage you to do is determine what kind of person you want to be. Determine what type of reputation you want to have. Determine what type of legacy you want to leave. And then discipline and steel yourself to that type of conduct daily. Not just today, not just when it's convenient, not just when you feel like it, but all the time in all matters. Integrity is something that can be learned. We're not born with integrity. We're not born honest. We're not born dishonest. We're not born without integrity. We learn what we learn in the course of our lives from the influences that we incur. Zig Ziglar was a great salesman and author and motivational speaker. And Zig Ziglar wrote something one time that I wrote down. I thought it was so great. I want to share that with you on this point. No matter who you are, what you've done, you can be a different and better person. Zig Ziglar wrote, "Honesty and integrity are absolutely essential for success in life, all areas of life. The really good news is that anyone can develop both honesty and integrity." Now allow me to close, please, with the advice that I also read from the matchless Mark Twain, who one time said, "Always do the right thing. This will amaze some people and astonish the rest." And remember, ethics is what you make it, because it's all about you. I'm Steve Proffitt. Thanks for watching.